What's up, guys? Pretty bad 1-3 night last night. And I don't know exactly what to say about that because we did have the Chicago Cubs with a 3-2 lead in the ninth inning, which is not really a bad situation to be in when you have a team as a slight underdog like that and they're winning going into the bottom of the ninth. Should be able to get it done, but no, they did not get it done. They gave up a run and then gave up another run in extra innings and lost. That's a brutal way to lose that one. And then we had Oakland. Oakland was the worst one last night. That one just didn't get there. The two hockey plays that split 1-1. A nice win on the Arizona Coyotes. They scored a lot of goals in that game, man. It was a good play, I think, and it was a good spot to be on Arizona in that one. It was actually closer than the final indicated. I think it was a 3-2 game pretty late in the game with Arizona with the 3-2 lead. It was tied at points before that as well, but Arizona was able to kind of run away with it and make it look like a blowout, which it wasn't, but I think it was a good performance from Arizona nonetheless, and a nice win there. And then Colorado Avalanche at a favorite price. I got a little bit worried about that one when I saw the line dip a little bit back down into like the minus 140s. But Colorado dominated that game statistically, man. It was like 40-25 in shots. They had the face-off percentage, like 55% going in their direction. So they outplayed the Rangers, and they still wound up losing in a shootout. I think Colorado was winning that game early, but I think they were also down one goal later in the game, tied it, and then it wound up going into overtime and a shootout, and they lost. Just kind of brutal to lose the Avs and the Cubs the way that those did, to lose them the way that I did yesterday. We'll move on to today, I guess. Well, we can talk about college basketball, I guess. I was at the East Regionals last night. UConn wanted a blowout. I mean, it seemed close-ish early, but you kind of just had the sense that this UConn team is just too much for this San Diego State team, which is not as good as last year's San Diego State team. UConn was able to really put it on in the second half. San Diego State had a lot of problems scoring in the second half, which I kind of expected. I thought that San Diego State would not even be able to get to 60 in that game. That was correct. UConn scored a bit more than I expected because of the way that they slow the game down, but it was an easy win for them, and I think they're going to be in position to probably get into the Final Four now because the opponent that they have tomorrow is the team that had to play in the later game, which was a tougher game. Illinois led wire to wire, but it didn't really feel like it. Like in the second half, Iowa State got back into the game. It was a closer game, and Iowa State just could never actually get to within more than 2 points. And they had possession a couple times when they were down 2, where they could have potentially tied or taken the lead, and it didn't happen. So it did feel like a pretty close game, even though it was a wire-to-wire win for Illinois. It was pretty close in the second half. It was an interesting contrast of styles there with Iowa State's defense versus Illinois' offense. It led to a pretty interesting game, and I think Illinois versus UConn is kind of a compelling matchup too, because again, you have offense versus defense, fast versus slow. Illinois, the fast offensive team versus UConn. UConn's well-rounded, of course, but they are, I would say, defense first. Their defense is better than their offense, and they slow the pace way down. So we'll see what happens in that game. My bracket got destroyed with Arizona getting upset by Clemson. Arizona off to a bad start in that game. It was played more at Clemson's pace, which is a slower. Clemson wants to slow the game down. Arizona wants to speed it up. Clemson did a good job of that early on, but then in the second half, Arizona was able to erase the deficit and actually take the lead. So at that point, it looked like Arizona's probably just going to get over the hump now and do this. But no, they surrender the lead right back, but also credit to Clemson for not letting up at all there, not letting the momentum swing in the other direction. They continued to hit some threes and push that lead right back up and maintain the lead for the rest of the game. And then Arizona still had chances at the end of that game in the final minute when it was within, it was like a 2-point game still in the final minute or so, or even later than that, in Arizona still not able to get it done. And really, you could pretty much say it kind of came down to poor free throw shooting on the part of Arizona. If they'd hit a couple more of their free throws, they'd probably be in the Elite Eight right now. And a lot of it was Ballo, which you might wind up with a Hacko Ballo. I don't know, the Shino Ballo, like in The Simpsons, or Homer polishes his head in the bowling ball polisher. No, but Ballo, he's a guy that you can intentionally foul and kind of get away with it, almost like a hack a Shaq type of thing, because he's so bad at the free throw line. I don't know if that's exactly what Clemson was doing last night, but I think they were okay with sending him to the free throw line. Like, if he's going to get an easy 2, foul him, make it a more difficult 2, because he's a 50% free throw shooter. He missed his first 6 free throws in the game last night, and he made the 7th his first free throw make, and he got a standing ovation from the Arizona fans. Like, we had that game on. There were like live look-ins to those games during the East Regional games that I was at. That was just ridiculous. You get a standing ovation for making a free throw. There's something wrong, man. Like, start doing some drills. Get better at free throw shooting. I don't know what to tell you. You can't be that bad at free throw shooting and succeed. So I'm sorry. And then Alabama, North Carolina. I mean, we had the live look-ins to that game as well. That was an entertaining game. The parts that I saw like the crucial moments towards the end of that game or whatever. And congratulations to Alabama as well as to Clemson for pulling off another upset. So that is now an upset-laden region with Alabama, the 4 seed, up against Clemson, the 6 seed. A Southern matchup in the Elite 8 there. Alabama able to take out what I thought was the weakest 1 seed in North Carolina. I bounced North Carolina around earlier in my bracket, but my bracket is dead anyway, thanks to Arizona being gone. But oh well, that's enough of a recap. We got a lot to talk about for today. I am going to be on a college basketball game to start out here, and that is going to be on Duke. We got 4 more games tonight. We're going to lay the points with Duke. Or, excuse me, not Duke, Houston. What am I saying? Oh, that's going to jinx me now. We're going against Duke. We're going to lay the points with Houston. I'm so out of it right now, man. I got home like almost 2:30 in the morning last night. No sleep. Public transportation in Boston is shameful at best. I would say it's much worse than that. Houston, -4 is going to be the play here. This looks like it opened 3 at some spots. I don't know if I ever saw that. Maybe 3.5s were out there like very briefly at a couple of maybe the offshore books that opened early, but it seems like it's been consensus 4 for a lot of the weekend. It actually seems to be ticking up a little bit further. We got 61% of the tickets, it looks like, on Houston, but 70% of the cash. They do have the cash discrepancy. And from just talking to people, although, I mean, seeing the overall market percentages probably means more than just what you hear from people when talking to like a few people like in person, but even so, it seems like the people that I talk to in person seem to like Duke in this matchup. It does seem like Duke is a little bit trendy, and in like the bracket games, it does seem like Duke is being picked more than I thought they were, because I thought they were kind of an underpicked commodity. The way that they looked pretty bad against North Carolina both times, and the way that they finished their season in the ACC, losing to NC State, it seemed like people were off the Duke train, but now it seems like some people are back on the Duke train and maybe a little bit off of the Houston train, and that's kind of why I like this one. I look to go on a really good team like Houston that had a scare in the previous game, and now especially they have some time off to prepare for some things. Houston, there were a couple of plays. If a couple of plays had fallen differently in that game against Texas A&M, Houston would not even be here. And I think they know that. They almost got upset in the round of 32 by Texas A&M as a almost double-digit favorite. They opened a double-digit favorite and it closed a little bit below the double digits, but they were still around a 10-point favorite. They almost lost. So I think that's going to really focus and motivate Houston here, and maybe give us a little bit of value in Houston, even though Duke is a good team. I think if you look at the power ratings, KenPom has both of these teams in the top 10, although I think he probably has Houston in the 1 spot. Maybe he has UConn in the 1 spot and Houston in the 2, but he has Houston way up there. And this line basically, I think, about right as far as KenPom. I don't know what he actually lined this game at, but yeah, he does have Houston in the 2 spot. Now he has Houston a 3-point winner in this one, 3-point favorite. I don't know. But he does have Duke actually all the way up into the top 5 now. Number 5, he's got Houston at 14th in offense, 2nd in defense as with his efficiency ratings. Duke 5th in offense. So the better offensive team, but 20th in defense. So the worst of the 2 defensive teams. But like I said, I think Houston suffering a scare and almost getting upset and knocked out in the last round. I think that's going to focus them. And now what we have is a Sweet 16 matchup, man. And I think Houston probably remembers this. They have some guys who were on their team last year, even though they've had a lot of turnover. Some of these guys returned from last year's team. they were in the Sweet 16 last year and they got upset. I think they took Miami lightly, another ACC team. They faced an ACC team and they lost, man. I think they kind of know that because they had a decent path there. They were my champion pick in my bracket last year. It seemed like their path was pretty good to get through there with kind of a weak 4 and 5 in their region there last year. And they lost to the weaker of those two that somehow made it to the Sweet 16 and made it all the way to the Final Four in Miami. And we see how not very good Miami is, really, with a lot of the same players on that Miami team this year. And they didn't even make the tournament. And they were one of the bottom teams in the ACC almost, which kind of tells you that they overperformed a bit last year. But Houston, I think that might motivate them a little bit more too, because they have Sampson, same coach as last year. They have some of the same guys as last year. Shed was on the team last year. I think Cryer, I think a couple of those guys were on the team last year. I think that's his name, right? I might be getting these names wrong. I don't even know. But I think that's going to motivate them because they're going to remember losing to that ACC team. And they do get to play this game. This is why they chose the Southern region, man. The South Regional is being played in Dallas, Texas. So geographically, it's a little bit of an advantage to Houston as well, even though Dallas isn't really that close. I mean, what is it, like a 4 or 5 hour drive maybe from Houston? I don't know how fast these Texas drivers drive, but they're going to be playing in their home state, in the state of Texas. So maybe a little bit of an edge there as well, geographically, although the Duke fans are certainly going to travel as well, and it's a game still in the South. So, but I like all of that for Houston. And Houston, we got the better defensive team, man, and they looked bad against Texas A&M there. So I like all of that. I think they play a physical style that I think Duke might not match up that well against either. Duke maybe not quite as good going up against these really physical teams like that. Duke seems to be a bit of the softer team, although, of course, now that I say that, I might just get this one completely wrong. But I do actually have Duke winning this one in my bracket, which my bracket is completely dead. But looking at the scenario here, I did not expect that Houston would be coming into this game off of an escape where they almost lost to Texas A&M. And that is the case, whereas Duke coming into this game, Duke might not be able to handle the physicality of Houston that well, but also Duke almost looks too good now with 2 easy wins in the tournament against Vermont. Nobody's really going to care about the win over Vermont, but then James Madison, one of those trendy 12 seeds in the tournament. A lot of people had taken James Madison to beat Wisconsin, which did happen. They beat Wisconsin, but then they kind of met reality, and Duke blew them out in that game. So Duke's not going to overlook Houston. Neither of these teams are going to overlook each other, of course, but you might be getting a little bit of an edge on Houston because Duke looked so good in their most recent game, whereas Houston almost lost and didn't look good at all. But I think we can slow that down a little bit, even though people are believing in the Duke hype again at this point after a blowout win over James Madison. I mean, James Madison, they're a good team, but it's still James Madison. I mean, they're probably, like in the 60s or so in KenPom's rating, 60s, 50s, whatever it is. Now we're facing one of the big boys, man, one of the biggest boys. So I would slow it down a little bit, even though Duke is good. Beating Vermont and James Madison, you're stepping way up in class now to face Houston, whereas as far as the opponents that these teams have faced in the tournament, the best of the opponents that these teams have faced in the tournament so far has been Texas A&M, pretty clearly. An SEC team that Duke did have some problems with. Texas A&M, very good rebounding team and pretty good inside team, like paint presence team. So Texas A&M, has definitely been the most difficult team out of the 4 opponents that these teams have had. And Houston is the team that faced them. So Houston has had the tougher road in the tournament, which is crazy, even though they're 1 seed. Duke was able to escape having to face Wisconsin, which might have been a more difficult matchup because Wisconsin, also a slower paced team. But Duke likes to play a bit slow now. They're not one of those Duke teams that runs anymore, but Houston plays even slower. So I think that also helps Houston because both of these teams like to play pretty slow now, and Houston's just better at it. Whereas I think Houston might struggle a little bit more if they're facing like a faster paced team. So I'm going to be on Houston in that one. As far as the other games are concerned today, you got Gonzaga, Purdue up from 4 to 5.5, but 56% of the tickets, only 54% of the cash. So I would kind of lean to Gonzaga on this one just because I still think they're kind of undervalued, not getting enough credit, whereas Purdue, I think people are forgetting now, like they're giving Purdue a pass finally after losing to a 16 seed last year, and looking at the fact that Purdue won by like 40 against Utah State and had one of the biggest blowouts in the round of 32 in history, and now that's what Purdue is coming off of. I think you got to slow it down a little bit, because Utah State, I mean, that was a pretty good matchup for Purdue. Purdue, I think, would have struggled way more with the intense pressure of TCU. So I was saying that could have been a difficult game if they had to face TCU, but they were able to completely avoid it, blow out a Utah State team that really isn't that good. And now they get to face a Gonzaga team I consider Gonzaga to be one of the big boys, man. And it's Mark Few, one of the best tournament coaches out there, even though he has never actually won the championship, I don't believe, but he's been in the championship before. So Gonzaga, I mean, as far as tourney experience, like coaching experience, I think they have the edge there. But I think maybe we're getting a little bit of value on Gonzaga with the line having moved up as far as it has. So that's kind of the way I lean in that one. I will also say Houston, I think, has more tournament experience right now than Duke does as well. Duke, still a pretty young team. Like Houston keeps like getting, like they keep making these tournament runs and having a lot of the same guys like returning to their team from year to year. So I think Houston does have a little bit of an experience edge there as well. And I think they have the coaching edge, because Shire hasn't really been there that long for Duke either, and hasn't really made like a huge tournament run yet. So I think last year was actually his first year, right? And they lost in the round of 32. So we'll see what happens there. Creighton, Tennessee. Tennessee looks like they're down from 3.5 to 3, but they also have 51% of the tickets, 55% of the cash. So they have the cash discrepancy. I'm not sure that I trust Rick Barnes, man, in the tournament. Like, I'm not going to get involved in this game, but you could also argue that Tennessee looked so bad against Texas, and it was a major escape as like a 7-point favorite in the low-scoring game, a Texas-style game. I had Texas winning that one in my bracket. It looked pretty ugly for Tennessee, so maybe they're being undervalued a little bit here, and they might be a little bit better than they looked in that one, whereas Creighton is coming off a double overtime game that debatably they should have lost, and the final score being a 15-point win or whatever is extremely misleading, as they were down 4 in the final like minute of regulation in that one or whatever. But you could also say that Creighton escaped because they were the favorite in that one up against an 11-seed Oregon. But Oregon, I don't know, man. Oregon had turned it on coming into the tournament time. So, and they're still one of the big boys, one of the big conference teams. So that's a tough game to gauge. I mean, I guess the slight lean, I guess, would be with the market on Tennessee with the cash discrepancy, but I just don't trust their coaching in this environment, although they had the uglier looking game in the previous round. So maybe Tennessee would be the look there at least. And then NC State, the tournament Cinderella, the double-digit seed that's still out there, playing against Marquette, who's up from 6.5 to 7. 53% of the tickets, 54% of the cash on Marquette. I think this is where it ends for NC State. If I was going to get involved on the side in this one, I would lean to Marquette laying the points, just because Marquette, they didn't look good again against Colorado, and they had a pretty close call against Colorado, so that might like scare them back into focus a little bit and make them look uglier than they actually are. NC State, but I mean, they also had a pretty bad looking game. They almost lost to Oakland, Oakland upset Kentucky, but NC State had to go into overtime to beat the 14 seed Oakland there. As I think NC State was like a 6.5 point favorite in that one, so that doesn't look good either. So they were off of an escape too. So, but I think this is the situation where the better team just kind of probably is able to win out in this case. So that's the way I look at those games. Now we move to the other games on the slate here. The NBA, we have a big Friday slate in the NBA. I have one play in the NBA. Do I have one play in the NBA? I think or maybe I have two. I don't know. This video is going to take longer than I wanted to here. Yes, I have 2 plays in the NBA. Let's get to these plays fast, man. I'm skipping the NHL. Okay, the NHL. Well, we'll talk about the NHL real quick. There's only one game. It's New Jersey at Buffalo. Slight lean would be to Buffalo in that one, even though New Jersey is still technically kind of fighting to try to get one of the wild cards. I think reality's got to set in at some point. They realize they're probably not going to be able to do it, even though they do have a lot of games left, so anything could happen. But they're playing a 3rd straight road game, although they do have 2 days off now. But they beat the Islanders, who are kind of in that mix in the wild card battle as well. And then they beat Toronto, and they outscored those teams by a combined 10-3. So that looks pretty good for New Jersey. Now they're playing a 3rd straight road game against the Buffalo Sabres, who aren't very good. And they got Pittsburgh and New York up next. Pittsburgh not that good, but Rangers, big game. Is it possible they don't quite have what it takes to be focused on this Buffalo team. Maybe Buffalo not technically eliminated, but I think they know they're eliminated. They have only one day off. They're staying at home, and they lost bad in their last game to Ottawa. So I do lean to the Buffalo Sabres in that one. Moving to the NBA, though, where I actually have two plays. I'm looking at a couple of these games, man. I mean, T-Wolves Nuggets is a big game. I would kind of expect a bounce back from the Nuggets, but the market looks like it is against it, so I'm not going to get involved in that one. But they lost in their previous game to the Suns, and now they got a pretty injured Minnesota team coming into their place, although the injury situation is being factored into the line, which I think is mostly just Towns being out. But you got Minnesota on a nice run of 3 wins in a row here, now having to go out into elevation for this one-off game. I mean, they're going to be focused for it, of course. These teams are battling for the 1 seed in the West, but Denver coming off a loss to Phoenix. I mean, I don't know. I think this might be the spot where Denver kind of turns it back on, but the market looks like it's against it. So maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Then I also don't like the Houston Rockets laying. Now they're up from 6.5 to 7.5 on the road. They're coming off a big win over the Thunder, where I took the Rockets in that one. 88% of the tickets and 82% of the cash on the Jazz, though. So it looks like the Jazz are the public home underdog with the cash discrepancy and reverse line movement going against them on the Rockets. I don't really get that, man. I mean, yes, the Rockets are going to have to be motivated because they're still 1 game behind Golden State, 1 game out of the play-in scenario there. So Houston does have a lot of motivation there. Yeah, but now it's a situation where they're laying 7.5 on the road with the pressure on them because they are going to need to keep winning to try to get into the playoffs. If they were getting points, then yeah, you like a team that's going to put in a full effort getting points, but having to lay a big number on the road where they might have a little bit of pressure coming in, and they're off a huge overtime win over the Thunder, now having to go out, this is going to be a second straight road game and having to go out into elevation. And when they come back, they face Dallas, who is in the playoffs right now, and then Minnesota and Golden State. Golden State, like their biggest competition right now for that last play-in spot, and Minnesota, of course, one of the best teams in the West. So those games are all meaningful. But are they going to look at this like, well, we have to, like, this is a game that we're going to show up for because we're still fighting for the last play-in spot, and you can't lose these like winnable games here. So maybe they'll look at it that way. But if you don't look at it that way, it does almost look like a sandwich spot as well. So I do still lean against the Houston Rockets there, laying that huge number there. And it looks like a huge number to be laying on the road. The Jazz have been playing really, really terrible basketball. But the Jazz, does that mean they've packed it in? I don't know, because it looks like they played somewhat competitively in their last couple of home games against the Spurs and the Mavericks. Maybe they'll want to get this final home game that they have here in the stretch and not like totally embarrass themselves. So maybe we'll get like a decent performance out of the Jazz for once in this one. Maybe they'll show up focused for once, potentially, but it's not a game I'm going to get involved in. The games I'm going to get involved in, the first one is going to be to go and jump and grab the points with the Oklahoma City Thunder, who did just lose to Houston. They were without Gilgeous-Alexander in that game, and they're without him in this game, it looks like, too, because otherwise they would be a favorite in this game, probably of 3.5, 4 points, I think, if he was playing. So maybe we're getting a little bit of extra value because he's not playing again, although you could argue the previous game was the injured player theory game because that was the first game that their star player was out, but they still lost that game because they were in a bad spot and they were up against a really motivated Houston team, and I was on Houston in that game, and I gave all the reasons why. So now I think this might be the spot where the Thunder do show up, and they do show up focused because they are still fighting for that 1 seed in the West. They got a good team in the Suns coming into their house. The Suns are public, 97% of the tickets and 79% of the cash on them. So they're public, and they have less of the cash than the tickets on them, according to the pregame percentages here, although the line's gone up from 1.5 to 2.5 on them, which might have just been the line moving due to a reaction to the Gilgeous-Alexander injury, the fact that he's still going to be out, which I don't think we knew until like last night maybe or today that the news came out that he's not going to play again. He's got like a leg contusion or something like that. I forget what it is, but they'll Oklahoma City playing a little bit safe with him because they do know they're in the playoffs, but I still think they're going to step it up without him, man. They're coming off a loss at home. They got a good team in Phoenix coming into their house. I do expect a good effort for Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City's been one of the best teams against the spread this year, really. Although, of course, the market has had to adjust and catch up to it. But I like this, man. I like the spot for it, even though the Suns also are probably going to be motivated because they're up against a good team as well. And looking at the standings, the Suns, where are they at? They're in the play-in right now, and they're only a half game out of the 6th seed, which is where Dallas is. So Phoenix does want to keep playing as well, of course, to get out of the play-in. and just get right into that first round of the playoffs. So, yeah, they do want that, of course. But they're playing a fourth straight road game now where they played 2 games in a row at San Antonio, blew them out in the first game, lost in the zigzag in the second game. So the Spurs were able to make the adjustments and take that second game. But that was a bad spot for Phoenix because they just blown out that same Spurs team. So they had really nothing to adjust and thought that they could probably handle them easily again. And they had the Nuggets up next, which they just went into Denver, just beat the Nuggets. That's a huge win, a 7-point victory on the road at Denver. Now they're coming out of that, and they have to go to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are they going to overlook Oklahoma City just a little bit because they know that SGA is not playing? Sugar, they know that he's not playing in this game. Gilgeous-Alexander. So is that going to mean that Phoenix might take their foot off the gas a little bit? Maybe, I don't know, but it is also tough to come now back out of elevation after a huge win at Denver and play again on the road. And they have another road game up next against the Pelicans, who are also a playoff team. I don't think they're going to take Oklahoma City completely lightly, but maybe in their minds they might kind of mentally think this might be a little bit of an easier game because Gilgeous-Alexander is not there, and they saw Oklahoma City lose to Houston at home without him. So that might be the mindset there, but we're catching points as an underdog with Oklahoma City at home now because of that news. So I'm going to grab Oklahoma City. I do think that it's a bounce back where they do show up focused, where the spot for Phoenix is not the best spot for all those reasons that I just gave. And going to the other game that I have, speaking of zigzags and teams that are trying to fight to avoid the play-in, I'm actually going against a couple of teams that are trying to avoid the play-in. I'm going against the Dallas Mavericks. They are public. They got 93% of the tickets, 86% of the cash at Sacramento. So they're a public team. Sacramento has flipped, it looks like, from a 1.5-point dog to a 1-point favorite. I believe they were around a 1-point favorite in the prior game, which was the same exact matchup, hosting Dallas. And Dallas, of course, won that game in ridiculous fashion, which is why I'm going to zigzag this one, because that game was such a lopsided result. Dallas has won 5 in a row. They just beat this Kings team by almost 40 points, man, 132-96, a 26-point win. And now they're playing that same game again. And they do have their in-state rival, who's one of the hottest teams in the NBA, the Houston Rockets, coming up next. So does that mean they'll overlook the Kings? Maybe, because this is going to be a zigzag, man, where even though the line is the same as it was in the previous game, so you don't really get line value on this one as far as that's concerned, as far as an overreaction to that extremely lopsided result. But still, you're going to have Dallas potentially being like mentally a bit complacent because they know what they just did to this Kings team. And when everything goes so well, you have no adjustments to make. Whereas the Kings, they're going to be in a pissed off mood, man. And I expect them to be able to make adjustments. They're going to be the team to make the adjustments here. I think that was just an ugly, ugly loss for them. I don't think they're going to let that stand. I think they're going to want to show up in this one. Public, as I said, they're coming in and looking at this and saying, well, Dallas just won this game by almost 40 points, man. How are we getting 1 point with Dallas? And Dallas is the team that's ahead of Sacramento in the standings. Like, how could we possibly be? It looks so easy to take Dallas, right? Well, when it looks too easy, man, it usually is. And Dallas, yeah, they're fighting to stay out of the play-in, but so is Sacramento. Sacramento's sitting in the 8th spot right now, and they're only 1 game behind Dallas. So that might motivate Sacramento even more in this game because they want to catch up to Dallas and get out of the play-in as well. So both these teams are motivated for that same reason, essentially, there. So if anything, that's kind of a wash there. I'm going to go with the zigzag. I'm going to play Sacramento. And then, oh man, this video is getting long because we have Major League Baseball going on today. And I have a lot of plays in Major League Baseball today, which is crazy. I feel like I should pump the brakes here, man, because there aren't that many games today. But I'm looking at the slate and I'm like, I'm just going to do all this. Maybe I'm just getting a little bit greedy here with baseball, going 0-2 yesterday with baseball, and knowing that baseball is back, and it's one of my favorite sports just in general, and I've done well betting on it throughout the years, so we'll see what happens. First game I'm looking at is the afternoon game here, Milwaukee and the Mets. They didn't play yesterday, so this is their season opener, actually, because these teams had a rain out yesterday, a postponement, whatever it was. Looking at this one, you got the Mets down from minus 115 to 109 as a small home favorite, which is actually telling you a little bit right there. That's telling you that Milwaukee is actually the better team or has the better starting pitcher in this matchup. Ding, 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 ding. I think both are the case here. I think Milwaukee's the better team and has the better pitcher here. So I'm actually shocked that we're getting them at an underdog price at all here, which might not be the case when the game actually starts. I don't know, but the lines move down. 65% of the tickets are on the Mets for some absurd reason. I can't tell you why. 71% of the cash over on the other side on Milwaukee. So you get reverse line movement on Milwaukee. You get, the line moving down. It looks like, because the Mets look like they're getting the public ticket percentages there, but the line moving against them and the cash discrepancy looks like it's way over on the other side on Milwaukee. So it looks like there is professional action coming into Milwaukee. I cannot tell you why the public would be on a Mets team that has been struggling other than the fact that they're just named the Mets. But like looking at the fact that Milwaukee was in the playoffs last year, everybody knows that Milwaukee's pretty good on them. Maybe they're like, I don't know. Are they like downgrading Milwaukee significantly because Corbin Burns is no longer there and he was their ace last year, so he's not their number one starter anymore? You got to look at the individual pitching matchups, though, man. Burns being gone, that's not good. He's a really good pitcher, but that doesn't mean that Milwaukee is all of a sudden just going to go from a playoff team to like the worst team in baseball or whatever, or a team that deserves to be an underdog in this specific matchup. Looking at this specific matchup, man, I'm surprised that the market looks the way that it does here, but the Mets are throwing Jose Quintana. He is their opening day starter. He's 35. He's a junk pitcher. And last year's ERA was pretty good, 3.57, but his whip was 1.31. His whip was awful, man. Like this guy, I've made fun of him on this channel for a while now. Like his career, stats are not good. And you have to go back, if you exclude the weird, not full years that he had the last couple of recent seasons there. Going back to the last full seasons that he had, with the Angels and the Cubs, his stats were horrific. He had ERAs well over the fours, a whip of almost 1.4. His career numbers a little bit better because he had decent career numbers really early in his career with the White Sox, but he's an old pitcher. He does not have overpowering stuff at all. He's a junk pitcher. His whip was really bad last year and indicative that his ERA should have been much higher. He's putting way too many guys on base. He had one of his lowest strikeout walk ratios of his career, even though his strikeout walk ratio has never been that good. He's not really a strikeout pitcher. He is a junk pitcher. So you have this guy and his stats. Look at his stats against Milwaukee. They have 64 at bats against him, even though it's only spread across 7 or 8 batters that have faced him before. Some of the main hitters in this Milwaukee lineup, though, are 18 for 64 off of him lifetime. That's 281 batting average, and he has only 15 strikeouts against them and 8 walks. And he has given up 3 home runs, so that's not good at all, man. 281 batting average, 3 home runs, and a really bad strikeout walk ratio in his career against these Milwaukee hitters. Bad stats against the Milwaukee hitters, not good. So that doesn't look good at all. And then you got Freddie Peralta is the starter for Milwaukee. He is the significantly better starter in this game. And even though his ERA was actually worse than Quintana's last year, his whip was way better at 1.12. I think he played a more full season last year. He's a better strikeout pitcher. His strikeout walk ratio, not outstanding, but better than Quintana's for sure. He's the younger pitcher. He's kind of just entering his prime now. The last few seasons, he's been a very good pitcher to the point where he's now the best pitcher in this Milwaukee starting pitching staff. I would say he's been quite good, man, over the last few years coming into his own. He's now 27, so kind of maybe about to hit his peak. And against the Mets hitters that they have on this team right now, the Mets hitters are 8 for 52 off of them lifetime, 154 batting average, even though the strikeout walk ratio isn't terrific, 19-6. That's still better than Quintana's is pretty significantly, but a 154 opponent batting average against these hitters. Give me the Milwaukee Brewers, man. They got, I think, a major advantage in this starting pitching matchup, and I just think they're the better team anyway. So I'll be on the Brewers. I'm shocked to see what the market is doing there. Brewers, actually, you can't get them at an underdog price anymore. You can get them at a small, minus money line at minus 105, which still means that they're technically the underdog, because if they're minus 105, it means that the other side is minus 115. But we'll take Milwaukee. Then looking at these other games real quick, we're going to go on 2 totals. We're going to take the over in the Pirates-Marlins game. We're going to go over 8 in this one. Looks like it's creeping up from 8 juice to the under up to 8. I don't really see the percentages yet, but it does look like the market percentages are coming in. It looks like the over might be getting the public tickets. So the public bettors aren't really coming in and playing a total in a Pirates Marlins game, really, I wouldn't think. But it does look like the cash is kind of on the Pittsburgh side, moving the line up a little bit not on the Pittsburgh side, on the over, on the side of the over, moving the line up a little bit on the over. And I think there are good reasons to play the over here. Although my first glance, I actually thought that playing against Miami would be the way to play this, although Miami's up from -115 to -126 on the money line with 88% of the cash and 81% of the tickets. So the market does look like it's moving up on Miami for some reason, but the situation that Miami's pitching in is just awful, dude. Like this is why I'm going to wind up playing the over in this one. Look at what these teams played a 12-inning game yesterday, so they both burned out their bullpens right away to start the season. They both used a ton of relief pitchers. The Pirates used 6 guys out of their bullpen. Both teams actually used 6 guys out of their bullpen. But look at what Miami did yesterday, man. Both of these starting pitchers yesterday only threw 85 pitches in the game, but Miami's relief pitchers, just after they took their starter, Luzardo out of the game, their relief pitchers totaled almost 130 pitches thrown in the game. That is absolutely insane. Whereas the Pirates relievers, they also still burn their bullpen down with using 6 relievers, using Chapman, using some of their better relievers in their bullpen. So the back end of their bullpen is pretty much used up and not available in this game. Although they limited the amount of pitches they threw to the point where their bullpen actually only threw about 50-something pitches. So a lot better than 130, which would kind of have me leaning to the Pirates a little bit here as far as the side is concerned. But I like the over more here because Miami blew out their relief staff to such a degree in that game yesterday. And who's starting for Miami? AJ Puck. Who is this guy? I don't even know who he is. He's a converted reliever. I think he made some appearances in a closer role last year for a bit. So his stats look pretty good, but I don't know. He's in his late 20s now, and he's been a reliever for a lot of his career. I don't think he's really necessarily built to be a starter. He actually has 0 starts in his major league career. So he's making his starting debut. You might say that he's going to be motivated because of that, but also he's not used to it. And that is kind of a recipe for him getting knocked out of the game early and not being able to go deep into this game. You have a converted reliever and you're only playing your second game of the season and you already have a converted reliever starting for you. That's not good, man. And with your bullpen so massively taxed, it's how is this pitching staff from Miami going to do anything? I don't expect them to, even though this game, of course, did go over the total yesterday. It went into 12 innings, so people might be looking at that and not really care. The fact that it went over somewhat with an 11-point total going into extra innings. But still, I think this has the recipe for an over written all over it. Martin Perez is the pitcher for the Pirates. And yes, he is making his Pirates debut. He was on the world champion Texas Rangers last year. But he's an old guy too, man. At this point, old-ish. He's in his 30s. He's a junk pitcher as well. He's not a guy that comes in and overpowers. His ERA last year was fine at 4.45. Not awful, but 1.4 whip last year. That's not good. He's definitely a hittable pitcher for sure. He's moved around a bit. His career stats not really good. His career stats are basically right in line with what his stats were last season with Texas. So at least that means he's consistent. But his strikeout walk ratio is also really bad. Over his career. He's not a guy that comes in and overpowers you. 1.9 last year and on his career. So again, he's consistently mediocre at best. There you go. Although his stats are pretty good against Miami's hitters. I will give him that. They're only 10 for 44 off of him lifetime, a 227 opponent batting average. But he does also have 2 home runs allowed against him and has only 5 strikeouts against him and 3 walks. So that doesn't look good either. So maybe maybe the junk that he was throwing just became a little bit difficult to hit, but still, I think this does not have the makings of a low-scoring game here at all, with both of these bullpens being very taxed in yesterday's game, especially Miami's. I won't read it. I tend to repeat myself too much and make these videos longer than they need to be, but you get what I'm saying there. In this game, going into extra innings, you might say that might mean that their hitters are going to be a little bit tired coming into this game, and maybe they'll rest a couple of their hitters or whatever. And I think the taxation of the bullpen, taxation. Oh, that's something we don't like to hear around here. Me being a libertarian, it is absolutely theft. But the fact their bullpens get taxed so much in that game, I think that lends itself to an over, and it does look like the market is in agreement with the over, at least as far as looking at it now in the morning here. So we're going to be on the over in that one. And then quickly before I get out of here, we're also going to be on an under in the St. Louis who is this? St. Louis and the LA Dodgers. Yeah, exactly. We're going to be on the under in that one. This game was a 7-1 final yesterday with Dodgers winning 7-1. So it actually went under the 8.5 or 9 that you can get in this game right now. We're going under 9 on this one. You can get the 9s are out there right now. I think you can get a 9 on this one. We're dressed to the 9s in this one. So this game did go under last night as well, but I don't think the zigzag thing is really that much of a phenomenon in baseball, man. You got to look at what situation is the bullpen, and I think that matters quite a bit. So you tend to want to go against teams that have really burned out their bullpen, be on teams that didn't use their bullpen a lot in the previous game and whose bullpen is in a better state, because I think that doesn't get factored into the line enough, really. And in this game, I think people are looking at this game and looking at the starting pitching matchup and being like, oh, I got to get out of here pretty quick. This video is going to end. They're looking at this and being like, oh, Zach Thompson against Bobby Miller. They know that Miller's been pretty good, but he's still kind of a new face in baseball. They're looking at this and thinking like, they're not going to want to play this game under. Who the hell is Zach Thompson? I mean, yeah, he's in his mid-20s, but the Dodgers have only faced him 8 times, man. 8 at-bats worth from the Dodgers offense, even though they do have good hitters. They've only seen him to the extent of 8 at-bats, and Will Smith, not the guy who's out there slapping Chris Rock, I don't think. We're not going to see Chris Rock get slapped during this game. He's the only hitter on the Dodgers' entire team that has a hit in their career against Zach Thompson. So usually when a pitcher is unfamiliar, usually they have the early advantage against the hitters that are unfamiliar with them because they're not used to hitting against them yet, and they don't know how to deal with them yet. So I think that is the case for actually kind of both of these pitchers to some extent. So the Dodgers have really not seen this guy yet, even though, yeah, his stats sucked last year. But I think the fact that he was at least a starter for portions of the year last year, and yeah, his stats weren't good, but still, he's not coming into it completely cold, and the Dodgers hitters might not know how to deal with him yet because they haven't seen him, whereas on the Dodgers side, Bobby Miller, he's been seen even less by St. Louis. They only have one hitter who's ever faced him before, which is Brandon Crawford, and yeah, he's hit him well, 3 for 5 off of him, although both of the outs were strikeouts, but still, only one guy has ever seen him before, so that's going to be a big advantage to Bobby Miller as well here, even though people know Miller is good. He had really good stats last year. He's a young guy. He's one of the newcomers in this Dodgers starting pitching rotation here, but I think both pitchers have the advantage here of the hitters really not having seen these guys before, so I think that lends itself nicely to an under here. And then looking at yesterday's game, these teams did not tax their bullpen very much. You see that St. Louis used more relievers. They used 3, but they explicitly used 2 of them, Palante and O'Brien, for well over, they used them for 22 and 28 pitches each. So they really saved their bullpen for the most part. And then Liberatore came in, and I think he's a guy who's like a long relief man as well. So they really didn't use any of their best relievers yesterday. So Cardinals were able to pretty much save their bullpen yesterday, and so were the Dodgers, as Glasnow had a good debut. I think it was his Dodgers debut, right? Because he was on Tampa Bay last year. He had a good Dodgers debut yesterday, and then they took him out after 6, and they only used 1 reliever. Yarbrough is probably the only guy who's unavailable out of the bullpen for the Dodgers today. He went 3 innings, 3 scoreless innings, a nice performance for him to actually not just save because he went 3 innings in the game, even though it was a 6-run win. So that's going to do it for me, man. It's going to be the under in that one, in the Dodgers game there. I guess we'll run through it really quickly because I do have time. In baseball, Milwaukee Brewers minus 105, over 8 in Pittsburgh, Miami, and under 9 in St. Louis versus the LA Dodgers. In the NBA, Oklahoma City Thunder plus 2.5, Sacramento Kings minus 1, and in college basketball, in the Sweet 16, Houston minus 4. Those are the plays today. It's a stacked card. Let's get back on the winning side. Peace.